My name is Mark Bellen, and I am the director of the Jakarta office of the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies and of the Office of Leiden University in Indonesia. However, I am joining you from the Netherlands today, and I will be your moderator with technical support by my colleague Visweta Manggarani from Jakarta. Today, we will present two approaches to heritage impact assessment. In the first presentation, we will go more into heritage impact assessment as a methodology to predict both the positive and negative effects of a policy or infrastructural development for heritage objects. By using the methodology of heritage impact assessment, not only archaeological values affected are examined, but all heritage values are taken into account. To perform this type of impact assessment is particularly essential in the context of urban environment that presents some conflicts of interest between heritage conservation and developments. Mismanagement of heritage sites and the degradation of historical character in an urban landscape are typical problems. Performing an impact assessment can increase the knowledge about the local heritage and the opportunity to use the heritage as a source of inspiration. In the second presentation, we will see how such an assessment can be performed, linked to a case study in Indonesia. The historic city of Yogyakarta is a well-recognized center of Javanese culture, and the urban form and architecture of the city are representations of traditional Javanese philosophy. The relationship between the transformation in urban form and cultural meaning, and how the current development process influences material culture and perceived meaning in Indonesian historic cities will be addressed. The lectures today will be in English, but you can also ask questions in Bahasa Indonesia in the chat box. After the presentations, there will be a Q&A session. We will also later take a group picture. Now it's time to introduce the two speakers of today. Mara de Groot is an archaeologist by training and managing director at the Center for Global Heritage and Development, a joint initiative by Leiden University, Delft University of Technology, and Erasmus University Rotterdam. Mara studied archaeology at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam and at the University of Melbourne. In 2005, Mara started working for the Netherlands Cultural Heritage Agency as an archaeological information specialist. From 2009 onwards, she was project manager for shared heritage at the National Archives of the Netherlands in The Hague. She was involved in the coordination of international projects, such as a handbook on archival damages in tropical conditions, and the nomination of the Dutch West India Company Archives as UNESCO Memory of the World, which was listed in 2011. Since 2014, Mara is the managing director at the Center for Global Heritage and Development. The center stimulates multidisciplinary and innovative heritage research and education, and is active in consultancy and training. Projects and collaborations include, among other things, the free online course Heritage Under Threat on the Coursera platform, and the Scanning for Syria project, which won a European Heritage or Europa Nostra Award this year. She is an advocate of using the Heritage Impact Assessment methodology. Heritage Impact Assessment is used as a tool to balance heritage protection with spatial and policy development, rather than simply to protect heritage from development, which can be considered as a win-win situation. Our second speaker is Pak Johannes Parlindungan. Pak Johannes is affiliated with the Department of Regional and Urban Planning of Universitas Brawijaya in Malang, Indonesia. He received his bachelor degree in architecture and his master degree in urban and regional planning from this university. He continued his studies at Queensland University of Technology, where he received his PhD degree in 2019 for his thesis entitled The Meaning Change of Urban Heritage, a Socio-Semiotic Investigation of Historic Areas in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. In this thesis, he investigated the relationship between architecture and cultural meaning in Yogyakarta, a World Heritage listed city. He demonstrated that people's attitude towards memory contributes to the idea of nationalism and identity. His findings stress the importance of the concept of locality and how it can support future governance in Indonesian cities. He has published multiple articles focusing on the influence of urbanization on the perceived meanings of heritage sites, not only related to Yogyakarta, but also to other cities in Indonesia. Having said this and having introduced the two speakers, I would like now to give the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Mara de Groot. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so can everybody hear me? Yes? All right. Marek, thank you very much for the introduction. Let's see. Hi. Hi. Oh. One moment, please. Hi. Yeah, it moves. Sorry, there's a delay in my computer. All right. Well, so I work for the Center for Global Heritage and Development, which is a collaboration between 3 universities in Leiden, Delft, and Erasmus University, Rotterdam. And we have by now around 90 affiliated scholars from many different backgrounds, from architecture, from anthropology, from law, from history, archaeology. And well, the aim of our center is to stimulate multidisciplinary and innovative research and education in heritage. And we also engage in professional training and consultancy. So our work is focused on 3 themes: environment, looking at transformation and redevelopment; identity, like craft revitalization and return claims, very important; and third of all, heritage under threat, looking at international heritage law to protect heritage and developing new techniques to detect and protect heritage. And in all of our work, the SDGs are central. So threats to heritage, because today we're talking about heritage impact assessment. So we're looking at threats, potential threats to heritage. And there are actually 3 kinds. What comes to mind when you talk with people about threats to heritage? They see images of what has happened and still happening in the Middle East, like intentional destruction and iconoclasm, the looting of objects, but this is just actually a small part. Natural threats are yeah, much bigger, like climate change, floods, cyclones, earthquakes. Even animals can be harmful to heritage, but of course also age itself. And the biggest threat are infrastructural developments like dams, highways, large-scale agricultural projects, and these often go under the radar. So today's topic is heritage impact assessment, and heritage impact assessment is just one among many impact assessments. Like there are gender impact assessment, environmental, economic, and the larger one, the strategic impact assessment. And it's a methodology to assess the effects of policy, infrastructural development, or other agents of external change. So this could be mass tourism, a disaster, or climate change. And the heritage impact, the impact assessment in general originated from the environmental discourse in the 1970s. And they are usually commissioned by government agencies, investment banks. The World Bank is very important. And then for heritage impact assessment, it's UNESCO. Now, HIA as a separate impact assessment is only very recent. Of course, it makes sense. It was born in an urban World Heritage context because there's where the pressure is, growth, renewal, infrastructural programs, industrialization, and mass tourism. And culture used to be, or still is, part of the environmental impact assessment, which is much more established and much more well known. And it was just a tick of the box. So there was the person who was performing the environmental impact assessment was also the one who looked at the potential impacts for culture. But this person wasn't necessarily educated in this field. So in the last 2 decades, UNESCO noticed that there was a increasing number of threats to World Heritage properties in their state of conservation reports. And there was a need for being more specific on the scale and nature of these impacts and the attributes being impacted. And this is where ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Site, developed the Heritage Impact Assessment. So you see the guide from 2011. So what are the objectives from a heritage impact assessment? First of all, it's about integrity, trying to protect the wholeness of a heritage resource in the face of external change. And then it's about authenticity, trying to preserve the significance and meaning in the function in the life of the community. And thirdly, to mitigate the adverse impacts of development and change, but also trying to enhance positive impacts of development, because it is recognized that development is not necessarily a bad thing for heritage. So we won't go into the whole process of heritage impact assessment because it's quite extended. But there are some key concepts that make you understand how it works. And to understand heritage impact assessment, it's important that you know about outstanding universal value. This is the cultural and or natural significance which is so exceptional as to transcend national boundaries and to be of common importance for present and future generations of all humanity. So this is really language from UNESCO World Heritage Framework. And the OUV is based on 3 pillars. If you want to nominate a heritage resource as World Heritage, you would have to deal with these 3 pillars. And first, that it should align with at least one, but better more, of the 10 World Heritage criteria. And this answers why it is so exceptional. And the second one is about the condition, the integrity and authenticity we just discussed. This answers the what. And then thirdly, you have to come up with a management plan to make sure that the cultural resource remains for at least 10 or 15 years in the same condition. Next to OUV, attributes are key. And this is, these are the physical elements or processes of heritage that carry or manifest this OUV. So it can be many things like buildings, street patterns, streetscapes, traditional lifestyle, or a clock tower. And this is rather easy in a World Heritage context because you have the online dossier, which gives you a clue about the attributes, but it can also be used outside a World Heritage framework. In this case, you would have to define for yourself what is the value of this particular heritage and what are the attributes carrying this value. And these are 2 peculiar examples. First one is the Bamiyan Buddha. Well, it was the Bamiyan Buddha. It was unfortunately destroyed in 2001 by the Taliban. There were 2 of these statues, but interestingly enough, the Bamiyan cultural landscape was nominated as World Heritage Site in 2003, and it was enlisted in 2003. So this was after the bombing, and this is actually because it was a cultural landscape. So in this whole area, there are much more attributes than just the 2 Buddha statues, even though, of course, it's a great loss. And then to the right, there is the image of Palmyra in Syria, which was destroyed in 2015 by ISIL. It used to be on the list of World Heritage Sites, but since after the destruction, it's now on the list of World Heritage Sites of danger, under danger. And it's awaiting a new follow-up plan. What are we going to do with this site? So it's not delisted. Well, in 2016, I took a course in heritage impact assessment in the Philippines. In the northern part, here you see the map with the red dot. It's important to know that it's located there because it's very hard to reach. You would have to, as an international tourist, you would have to fly to Manila, then you have to take a flight up to Laoag, then you have to take a bus back and a tuk-tuk. Anyway, much too much hassle. So not too many international tourists go there, but they're mostly domestic tourists that go to Bigan. Because Bigan was nominated as a World Heritage Site in 1999. And it is considered the best preserved example of planned Spanish colonial town in Asia. And the OUV, like we discussed before, is based on 2 of the 10 criteria. Criteria 2 is unique fusion of Asian building design and construction with European colonial architecture and planning. And criteria 4, the second criteria, Bigan is an exceptionally intact and well-preserved example of a European training town in East and Southeast Asia. Well, in fact, these I highlighted some of these words because they give us a clue about the attributes. And here they are. They are the ancestral houses, a historical checkerboard street plan, a living city with a mixed use of houses, traditional lifestyle, and local industries. So if they are impacted by a factor of external change, there is a risk of devaluating. Now, when it became a World Heritage City, what happened is what happens to most cities that become World Heritage City. They experience mass tourism, traffic jams. Well, in Bigan, the cobbled streets are very narrow. Then the ancestral houses and workshops are being converted into hotels. And in the end, this leads to gentrification. Obviously, a process that UNESCO didn't want from the start. Actually, the local population, many of the people there are very happy that their houses are being sold to developers because it's very expensive and costly to maintain these old wooden houses. But the municipality, of course, is afraid that the whole atmosphere, the reason why it was listed as a World Heritage Site, one of the reasons, is devaluating. So they asked a group of international heritage experts to look at 2 of the policy plans they came up with. And one of them was to levy an entrance fee for international tourists. And the second one was hotel zoning, meaning that no more hotels were allowed in the inner city. They would have to be in the municipalities and in the neighboring municipalities. So our group was going to look at the second plan, so the hotel zoning plan. And in our group, there was a young architect from the city, from Bigan itself. And he came with these 2 images. And the top one shows you a plan that was actually on the table at the moment, which is the plan of a 16-story high hotel building. In the neighboring community, it's not in Bigan itself. You see the inner city of Bigan in the picture below, and you can see that it doesn't have any high-rise buildings at all. And this plan, if it would be executed, it would have a definitely negative impact on the historical atmosphere, a visual, severe visual impact. So our advice to the municipality was to try to strengthen the relations with the neighboring communities and to discuss these kind of issues, but also to release tourist pressure. Because what we found out also is that many of the domestic tourists, as I told you, there are many more domestic tourists than international tourists. They come here to buy traditional products. Bigan is known for its basketry and for weaving and for pottery making. But actually these products are not unique to Bigan. They are unique to the whole northern province, Ilocos Norte. So that gives a chance to to come up with a regional touristic plan. So I'm coming to the conclusion of my presentation. I'm going to look at the pros and cons of heritage impact assessment. Of course, there are much more pros than cons, otherwise we wouldn't be advocating it. But yeah, there are some negative sides to it. Unfortunately, it's usually still not required. In the Netherlands, for example, it's only required when there is development scheduled near a World Heritage site, and the advice, the report, doesn't need any follow-up. It's still usually part of this environmental impact assessment, where people doing the assessment that don't really have a cultural background, or they're not educated in archaeology or architecture. And then thirdly, it's not a standardized methodology. It's still relatively young. It still needs to grow. This being said, a new guide is coming up next year, produced by mainly ICROM. And this guide deals with the criticism from the previous one. So the steps are more defined. And then fourth one is that the client is usually the one to approve the heritage impact assessment, which can cause a conflict of interest. Very famous is the Liverpool case. There were 3 or 4, I'm not sure, heritage impact assessments performed, but the same development of the harbour, and they all had a different outcome. And this was because they were all issued by different clients. So the pros, what I think is most important is what Marek also mentioned in the introduction, that HIA looks at all heritage values. Here in Europe, we work with the Valletta Treaty, Malta archaeology, which means that if development is scheduled, a developer needs to commission an archaeologist that looks at if potential archaeological values are impacted and how they are impacted. But this only looks at underground heritage values, while HIA looks at above ground and underground. So also the built monuments, but also the intangible heritage, like the historic atmosphere, craft production, lines of sight. For example, if a harbor is constructed, HIA also looks at the local fishermen population. Does it have a negative impact on them? So I think HIA really fits in the sustainable development course. And HIA is not just for protecting sites. It's recognized that we cannot protect everything as it is and leave it as it is. This creates a heritage time bomb, as Gilmer called it in 2017. I always say, but it's a bit blunt, use it or lose it. The proposed mitigation measures in a HIA result in a balance between conservation and development. And development can definitely also be positive. For example, the construction of a train station could be harmful, could be potentially harmful for a site, but the actual train station could also improve access to the heritage. And the whole process itself can render extra information to the research being done. This can render extra community engagement to the stakeholders interviews, and also extra publicity, which hopefully brings extra visitors and income to maintain this site. Now, I really think that community involvement is very important from the start of the HIA process. And it looks at these potential social impacts, social cohesion, changes in local populations, traditional lifestyle. And in this way, it also aligns with the Faro Convention, which is a treaty by the Council of Europe about shared responsibilities in improving our common living environment and the right to engage with heritage, protecting cultural diversity and locality. So as a developer, if you perform a heritage impact assessment, you will get a better end product because you would have more support for your development. So this is why we promote heritage impact assessment through the Center for Global Heritage and Development. Also outside the World Heritage Framework, we think that large companies that have a major influence on our environment should use heritage impact assessment as part of their social corporate responsibility. And we organize short trainings. And in 2021, we will have a digital training with Ayesha Pamela Rogers. And she's actually one of the creators of the Heritage Impact Assessment method. Okay, this was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mara, for your introduction to Heritage Impact Assessment methodology, but also using examples in how it has been used and the pros and cons of heritage impact assessment, which I think also quite relevant. I think heritage impact assessment is a very contextual approach to not only preserving but also putting it in a more societal based approach on how does it work within society. Of course, there are already questions coming in. I also have some questions, but I will wait until the presentation of Pak Johannes. So after Pak Johannes' presentation, we will have some questions on the methodology. I'd like now to give the floor to Pak Johannes. Silakan, you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
Thank you, Mari. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marik, for introducing me and Mara for the first presentation. I hope that you are able to see my presentation and also hear my voice. In this presentation, I will present a part of my work in Yogyakarta. Yeah, that is associated with the heritage impact assessment. I will start. In this slide, I would like to introduce you the location of my country, Indonesia. And in this case, Yogyakarta is located on the Java Island. Okay. This is the map of Java Island. Jakarta is the capital city of Indonesia, and Bali is well recognized as a main tourist destination. The city of Yogyakarta is located in the central Java region, just near the Borobudur and Prambanan temples. These temples are registered as the World Heritage of UNESCO. So the city is the capital of the special region of Yogyakarta province. Okay, this is my background. Currently, urban development brings modernism and commercialism as competitors for cultural meaning. Urban space is no longer understood as a library of traditional philosophy and history. Rather, it is regarded as a tunnel or machine to serve functional and economic productivity. The first photo shows a shopping center with global branded logos. You can see that, which is located at no more than 100 meters from the Sultan Palace or Kraton. The second photo illustrates historic buildings side by side with modern shops. So we can see commercial symbols dominate the visual of this corridor. And the last photo shows Malioboro Street in a distance. Now the street corridor is criticized because there are many high-rise hotel constructions. Unfortunately, there is nobody have explains how the situations influence the meanings of spirituality of the access. The other problem is the inadequacy of law enforcement and urban planning policy to protect historic sites. A research argued that in many cases, the destruction of historic building is allowed to facilitate urban development. So this condition stimulates alteration in cultural meaning and create an ambiguous place identity of Yogyakarta. This is my approach. Following socio-semiotic framework, I use two concepts, expressions and content. This expression corresponds to the physical representation that is perceived as the vehicle of meaning, while the content is the message or meaning of the physical representations. Hence, I will mention the expression as physical representations and the content as meanings. So, as you can see in this presentation, the study elaborates the current meanings using in-depth interviews, observation, and map analysis. Now, I will talk about the urban heritage of Yogyakarta. This slide shows you the urban heritage of Yogyakarta that comprises traditional buildings and urban fabrics. The city was initially developed following two traditional concepts called the philosophical axis and Catur Sagatra. Each concept is represented by particular buildings and spatial configurations. The philosophical axis takes the form of a south to north linear configuration comprising Pangkrapiak monument at the south, the palace or kraton in the middle, and Tugu monument at the north. The northern straight corridor connecting kraton and Tugu monument is currently well known as Malioboro Strait. Catur Sagatra is smaller spatial configurations around kraton, comprising the kraton itself, the square or alun-alun, the Great Mosque, and Bringharjo Market. The two configurations have an association with Javanese traditional teaching and spirituality that are still believed in the present day. In addition to the heritage of Javanese tradition, Yogyakarta also has what we call as the colonial heritage. The heritage objects are the legacy of Dutch built in the 18th to 20th century. This slide presents the most recognized colonial buildings in Yogyakarta. There are post office, bank office, an export that currently used as a museum, an assistant resident office that currently used as a presidential office and currently recognized as Gedung Agung, and train stations. In addition, there are other colonial buildings that are currently used as hotel and shops. From these pictures, we can understand that Malioboro Street is a highly important heritage area due to the presence of well-preserved heritage buildings, as well as the cultural and historical values attached to the buildings and the area. And what about the conservation policy? The central government of Indonesia and local government of Yogyakarta have a high concern for heritage conservation. The government complies with the international conventions of heritage conservation and ratified the Heritage Act and provincial regulation concerning heritage conservation. We have many historic buildings and listed as heritage. This photo expresses the way the government implements Heritage Act and introduces the conservation status to the public. So the people have a good recognition for heritage. In addition, since 2017, the area of philosophical axis has been in the tentative list of the World Heritage of UNESCO. This is the situation in the case study. The expression of urban form resembles the physical representation. In the study, I used three categories of urban form: street network, land uses, and building structures. The study compares this situation in the past using maps depicting the condition in 1925 and the present day. Data about the current situation are collected using observation and Google Maps. From the maps, we can see that there is no noticeable difference of street network between the past and present. In general, the philosophical axis is still obvious along with the grid pattern. However, the current street space demonstrates a different situation as reflected by the traffic jams and the motor vehicles and pedestrians. The interviews suggest that these elements represent the modern situation of the street space. The current land uses and building structures demonstrate the exactly different situation than in the past, we can see that there is the addition of so many buildings, indicating that the urban center is currently a high density area. This area currently contains commercial facilities indicated by the red blocks. In addition, also the presence of historic buildings endorses tourism, and consequently, there are many commercial facilities and monumental buildings found in the northern axis. Okay. This slide expresses the current situation surrounding Marlborough Street. This area is currently a high-density urban environment with various building types and dominated by commercial facilities. In this photo, we can see that the historic buildings or heritage are currently in a modernized area, side by side with the shops, shopping centers, hotels, with modern building style. There are strikingly different themes appeared in the urban landscape. The photo at the bottom left corner shows a high-rise hotel interrupts the skyline. And we can understand that the situation happens because the area are highly commercialized as expressed by the red zone on this map. So we can find many billboards and commercial advertisement as well as traffic jams. The content of urban form resembles the meanings. In this study, I collected data from mass media and interviews to understand perspective from the side of general publics, or at least the participants regarding the overall meanings and urban landscape. Now from the interviews, I found the meanings in 4 categories: place, history, Japanese culture, and urban growth. The sense of place is represented by public space and historic places. These public places are recognized as vibrant places and historical promenades. The history and colonization are expressed by all traditional and colonial structures. These objects represent the historical growth of Yogyakarta. The colonial structures also express the ideological tension between the locals and colonial authority in the past. The traditional structures represent Japanese culture as primarily present in the form of street pattern and building structures. In this case, these objects express the philosophical axis and mythologies. It is a place where people can find the expression of traditional in the physical environment and in the social life. And lastly, the urban growth and modernity are primarily expressed by modern buildings, commercial facilities, commercial banners, billboards, motorized vehicle, and tourism. It is evidence that, in particular extent, the representation of place, history, and Japanese culture also contribute to the representation of urban growth and modernity through tourism. And the research, this slide demonstrates the perceived meanings of the heritage area as the result of semiotic analysis. The expression demonstrates the physical elements of urban environment, and the content demonstrates the perceived meanings. As shown in the preceded slide, we find that there are 4 categories of meanings: the place, Japanese culture, history and colonization, and urban growth or modernity. What can be inferred by this finding is that the change in the society and urban activities can stimulate the development and presence of different physical elements that convey different or new meanings. In this case study, the meanings of heritage are mixed with the contemporary meanings of urban modernity that can strengthen or weaken the heritage. It is interesting to note that the heritage value of individual traditional and colonial buildings are still well conserved, but it is not the case of the values at the urban landscape scale. The next slide will demonstrate this finding. This slide demonstrates the semiotic structure. On this slide, we have street, land use, and building that makes the area functional as a commercial area. The street provides accessibility for motorized vehicle and pedestrian. The land uses and buildings gives functional facility, providing particular services such as shopping, resting, or touring. Each morphological element has a sort of variance that make functions more specific and also add connotative meanings. As shown in this slide, Each variant of morphological elements carries particular connotative meanings, like this. Hence, the area reflects a meaning that comes from the aggregate of variants. Here, the overall meanings are associated with secularism and the polarity of cultural representations. It means that the heritage object is not the sole carrier of meanings, and at particular extent, the historical and cultural meanings can be dimmed or decreased by the surroundings. In the context of urban landscape, there must be a concern about this. This is my last presentation. The study suggests that the locality cannot be separated from the contemporary modernity and globalization. So it should be a mutual relationship. On one side, globalization supports locality, especially through the implementation of heritage conservation. The government intervention is very important in conserving the heritage and regulating its use. In addition to this, the role of other social bodies is also important to involve in the grassroots level, especially in internalizing the values into the society. The support for localism in turn contributes to the economic and urban growth through tourism and the following economic activities. As consequence, the globalization and modernity become stronger than before. This phenomenon is obvious through the presence of modern buildings and some capitalistic practices. And in this stage, the globalization gives a drawback to locality. The recognition of this cyclic process is important to understand the dialectical relationship between localism and its competitor. It is interesting to know that this kind of dialectic is expressed by urban form that is supposed to be in a good control using the current urban planning and urban development schemes. However, the problems still come over and over. And then I would like to recommend some aspect here. The protection of individual historic building is not enough without better control over urban development surrounding the heritage sites. And the sustainability of heritage as a cultural and economic asset should be maintained through conservation strategy involving general public perception of cultural meaning. There is a need to redefine heritage impact assessment in the context of urban landscape. Thank you for the time given to me to present part of my work. And I would like to give some acknowledgement to LPDP and to QUT Australia and to my office, Department of Regional and Urban Planning, and particularly to Leiden University for inviting me to be here today. Thank you very much, Mark.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Johannes for your introduction to a very specific case study of Yogyakarta. For all of us who have been to Jogja, it's very recognizable in terms of our impressions ourselves and the pictures that you have shown about Jogja. We will now move to the question and answer session. As indicated, you can ask through the chat function. There are already some questions that I can ask to the participants, but also you can also raise your hand if you would like to have a reaction or if you want to ask a question. First, maybe to both speakers, and maybe to Johannes first, as you have used the example of Yogyakarta in terms of heritage preservation and assessment. The question is, how can we make local government adopt the heritage impact assessment as a method in developing their cities or towns? So how to involve the local government in heritage impact assessment, and maybe you can have some experience in how maybe the local government and Yogyakarta was involved or not involved in the heritage impact assessment. Please, Pak Johannes. Oh, you have to unmute.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes. I would like to answer a question from Mary Amarita. Okay. For Bu Mary, thank you for your question. The question is very good. In this question, I would like to give some insight that there should be a cooperation, not only with some stakeholders that concerned with the heritage, like architect or perhaps anthropologist, but we also should have enough cooperation with urban planner. So, for example, in Indonesia, we have a strict urban planning regulation called RDTR. So in the RDTR, or each local government have many opportunity to make a zoning plan. Yeah, so this zoning plan can be used to promote commercial area, and at the same time to promote the heritage conservation with a more detail. So I think the key question, the key solution is we should use the urban planning regulations more intensely, particularly to face the urban development in Indonesia, particularly in Yogyakarta. That's my short answers to Ibu Mary Ambarita.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Johannes. Actually, it overlaps a little bit with my question about how local government can adopt the heritage impact assessment. I was wondering if Mara has any experience in dealing with local governments with respect to performing a heritage impact assessment.
Yes, I do. I noticed that because it's still very unknown, that this method, it's very important to mention the benefits of it. My experience, I don't have any experience in Indonesia, unfortunately, but my experience in the Netherlands is that heritage is seen as something of, we have to protect it, be careful. Like developers, they don't want archaeology to be on the proposed site, because then it's only bothering. It will cost money, and it's no, it's a negative part, and we want to get rid of that. And with heritage impact assessment, as I hope was clear from my presentation also, that we work with the developer instead of against the developer. And the development of course can be commissioned by the municipality. And then yeah, the end product is a better product, because if you would involve the local stakeholders from the start and see if you can find a balance between this preservation and development, that's excellent. I know, for example, in Amsterdam and in Rotterdam, a major construction has been done, and important construction. It really was an addition to the mobility of the city. So the archaeological values had to, the archaeological site had to be removed. But in this case, what they did is they made an exhibition, a glass box next to the stairway from the metro construction in this case. So that people that use these elevators regularly to go to work or to go to school, at least they get a notice, they get a notion of this history, local history that used to be there before. And it's really a better end product, because yeah, in this case, it was recognized we cannot keep the archaeology in situ, what we can do is tell the story to people. And that is actually what we really want, right? That people experience the past. Yeah.
And also, perhaps in the case of Indonesia, we have two problems regarding the implementation of heritage impact assessment. The first problem is we don't have any regulations to stipulate us to use the heritage impact assessment. That's the main problem. Yes, we have the team called the expert team of heritage, TACB, tim ahli cagar budaya. But still, there is no regulation that the team should use this method to face some, for example, a new construction of new buildings like that. And not all urban planner also recognize the heritage impact assessment. And the second problem is there is no formal methodology of heritage impact assessment, as Mara has explained better. Yes, so everybody can, for example, investors or official government or academics can use very different methods to value the heritage with also different perspective. But in this case, as an academic, I see that it is another opportunity to us to fill the gap with some new collaboration with many stakeholders and many experts, interdisciplinary, yes, to make the better methodology and the most useful method for the heritage impact assessment. Thank you, Marit.
Yes, thank you, Pak Johannes. I also understand from the presentation of Mara, because the heritage impact assessment is a relatively new assessment, used to be part of the environmental impact assessment, that it is still, under development. But will it lead to a kind of formalization? My question to Mara is because there are other impact assessment, gender impact assessment, economic, the environment. Have those been certified and formalized? And is this also something that could be the case in the near future for the heritage impact assessment?
Yeah, that's a good question. We discussed it also during the training in Vigan with all the people that were involved with the creation of heritage impact assessment. And there are different views to that, that if we want a certification or not, and to have a fixed method. It's also recognized that dealing with heritage, you're dealing with values. So there is not an ultimate truth to it. But yes, I think that in heritage impact assessment, it's a logical procedure. If you follow the whole procedure, there are many steps involved. You can explain to everybody why you make certain decision, why you think it's a negative impact or a benefit, actually. Yeah, so it's something that is not sure yet if we have to fix it in one method. It's hard to answer.
The positive thing is that it creates work for us academics to discuss this issue and to and therefore to follow this path. The impact assessment, I assume that if you make a report on of the assessment, there will be recommendations. Does it also include the mapping of possible funding of the outcome of the recommendations? Because I can imagine that if you come to a recommendation that needs investment in terms of based on the outcome of the recommendation. What is your experience with that? Is it also part of the assessment to see whether funding would be available to implement the recommendations? Is it usually a government issue or public-private issue? What are your experience with that?
The question is to me, or?
Well, maybe to both of you, because you both have been engaged in this kind of assessment. So maybe Mara first, and then I will ask Johannes to add.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, the role of the assessor is to make recommendations about the potential, like the exhibition I mentioned. It could be in many different ways, but there it ends. So it gives this recommendation to the developer, and also up to him or her to see if the funding is available and how to get this funding, and to monitor if the follow-up is done in a proper way. So that's the next step. Yes, the funding.
Yes,
And
of course.
Johannes, silakan.
Yes. If we talk about funding, it is a very difficult matter. You know that the funding will come with the intentions of the local government, particularly, especially in the spirit of autonomy daerah, regional autonomy in Indonesia. Every development in its area, in its uh, territory, will very depend on the highest stakeholder, the leader, the government. I'm sorry, the governor, the mayor, etc. So if the local stakeholder do not have any concern with heritage, so they will not give enough budget to the development. So they will tend to more endorse economy, like tourism, like that. So perhaps, yes, it's kind of political issues if we talk about budget. Why we always have very low budget in heritage conservation, but not all region like that. For example, in Jakarta, they have very high concern with heritage, you know, in Yogyakarta and perhaps other city like in Sumatera Barat, we have a new city that has been listed in the World Heritage UNESCO.
If I may add a little, because this, what happened in the Netherlands is that it was recognized not that much time ago that if a municipality is faced with an extraordinary cultural resource, for example, this was in the eastern part of the Netherlands, they found a certain prehistoric graves, and that was too expensive for the municipality to pay for this follow-up program. But it was clear that it was in a national importance to do something with this site. So what happened afterward is that there is now this funding available at the national level for municipalities that suddenly are faced with these exceptional finds and have to come up with a plan either to preserve it or to exhibit it or anything else. So this is really a step ahead. It's not a lot of funding, but still it's the first step.
So, Pak Johannes, do you think that the team Ahli Cagar Budaya could play a role in this respect in terms of having a more authority in terms of in implementing heritage impact assessment, but also in terms of supporting funding?
Yes.
Ideally.
Yes, Mark, of course. Tim Ahli Cagar Budaya has a very crucial role in the heritage conservation in Indonesia, because this team has enough support to local government to reduce some development. So, for example, in Kota Malang, if someone want to build a new building in a historic area, they should call the THCB. If they don't do that, the police guard will come to the site to stop the development. So again, it will be very depend on how the local government strengthen the capacity of this team. So, but this team do not have any capacity to support or endorse any funding. Yeah, even so, unfortunately, they only give some expertise, yes, and recommendation for the heritage conservation.
And are the members also trained in heritage impact assessment? The members of the team?
Yes, of course. Some THCB in some city in Indonesia have special course in heritage and heritage impact assessment. But I hope that the course or the workshop will be spread equally to another territory of Indonesia. So we have the equal expertise in heritage impact assessment.
I see that there's a in terms of, well, 30, 40 years ago, a more recognition of the importance of heritage in Indonesia, as it also underscores national identity and also local identity. I specifically see this in a number of museums that are being set up all over Indonesia. Is it safe to say that it will also have a positive impact on the recognition on heritage in general? Because you mentioned there is meaning and there's content. There's a physical building, but there's also meaning that people attach to heritage. In general, do you see that the concept of addressing meaning to heritage, or that people are more aware of the meaning of heritage, is also in general increasing in Indonesia?
Yes, of course. Particularly in this situation where when we aware that heritage is a kind of sustainable economic resource. So many municipality measure make heritage conservation as a main program in Indonesia. They try to enlist more heritage buildings, and at the same time, it will increase the pride among the people. So the people will have enough trust to the government. So it's very good to the society and especially for the local economic, of course. But as I have explained before, we need the better urban planning regulation to avoid the urban development, the uncontrolled urban development.
Yes, because in Jogja clearly there's a tension between what you have explained in terms of heritage sites and the urbanization and economic aspects.
Yes.
I would like to ask Mara, if you make a heritage impact assessment, who are actually the actors doing this? Are you by yourself, or do you have a team? And is it a kind of desk research approach, or is it also what by Johannes did with interviews, etc.? Maybe not too long, but how does it really work in practice if you do such an assessment?
Yeah, oh, that's a good point, because it didn't come up in my presentation, but it's a teamwork, because you would need experts on different fields. For example, you would need an anthropologist, you would need somebody who's into construction. Like, for example, if you have what I mentioned, the construction of a train station, then the construction itself could be harmful to a heritage resource. So you need somebody who can calculate for example, the vibrations of this work, what could do the damage to the cultural resource. So yes, you start with the desk research, where you look at the plans carefully, and then you decide upon what kind of expertise do you need. And together with them, then the field work starts. You have to find the right stakeholders. That's a very tough matter, of course, because who are the stakeholders? this is asked frequently by students when I teach about heritage impact assessment. And then really I don't have a clear answer, but it takes time and to find the people who are really involved with the cultural resource. So yeah, so it's a teamwork, and it involves both desk research and field work.
Thank you. And for you both, if you do a heritage impact assessment, is this done also proactively or only on commission that a certain external organization asks you to do the assessment? Maybe Mara first and by Johannes then.
Okay, well, to be fair, I just did the trainings, but we work together now with Ayesha Pamela Rogers, who's actually residing in Pakistan. She was one of the first person who started developing the heritage impact assessment, and we work together with her, and hoping also to find yeah, these kind of assignments. But up till now, yeah, we just started. Our main reason is to promote the method and to train people, and then hopefully also some jobs will come out of it.
So this is maybe a commercial during this webinar. So if somebody's listening, please contact. And by Johannes, I mean, you did your research because of your PhD, but have you been also involved in new assessments after you finished your PhD and based on requests from municipalities or other institutions in Indonesia?
Okay, I have not involved in any heritage impact assessment project, but I mean that I only concerned in the academic perspective about how what the impact of the urban development and to the heritage, but not in the context of heritage impact assessment project. But in this Zoom, I can see that there is my colleague, Pak Punto Wijayanto, who has so many experience in heritage impact assessment in Jakarta. So I want to give a greeting to Pak Punto Wijayanto. Hello, Pak Punto. Nice to meet you here. So we have an expert here also. Thank you.
Okay, let me see if we have another question. Before, for very specific question to Pak Johannes, you mentioned the Catur Sagatra in your presentation. For those who are not familiar with this expression, you talked about the philosophical axis from north to south, which is also part of the Javanese philosophy. But you also mentioned the term Catur Sagatra. Could you please explain a bit more detail what that was?
Yeah, Yogyakarta has two traditional cosmology called philosophical axis and Catur Sagatra. Philosophical axis and Catur Sagatra are the initial concept of Yogyakarta, built by the first Sultan of Yogyakarta around the 18th century. Yeah, these two philosophies has the meanings that to represent the heaven at the north, yeah, the earth as the kraton, and the world of deity, like that. So it is interesting to know that this kind of belief is still present among the Javanese traditional in Yogyakarta until the present day. So when I asked some questions to them, they said that yes, they still recognize their philosophy because of the presence of Kraton, Tugu, Pangkrapiak, and Catur Sagatra. So it can be said that it is important to conserve these objects and this configuration for the long term to conserve the local belief in Yogyakarta.
Yes, and I think that's also quite important, the local beliefs that people attach to heritage.
Yeah,
So it's not only buildings, as you explained, because it's more than only buildings. It's also about intangible heritage, I guess. And I know that the government of Jogja is trying to have the Javanese philosophy enlisted as intangible heritage with UNESCO. There's another example of more of morphological heritage improvement, which is the city of Samarang, where I think the mayor recognized that colonial buildings are also markers of the city's identity. Do you see this kind of approach also in other Indonesian cities besides Jakarta, which is a big city? But is it something that other cities see as a kind of example of improving commercialization of colonial buildings or to attract more tourists?
Yes. So in many cases, we should aware of how we give permit to other buildings, to the new buildings. And particularly, we should give some strict delineation between the old area and the new area, so we can maintain the proper activity in the old area, like you have exemplified in Semarang. Semarang has a good example in conserving colonial buildings. We know that we have the old Semarang also, like in the old Batavia in Jakarta.
Thank you very much. I also still have a question for Mara. I think the assessment is also, there are factors in terms of attributes also and other things to give the site a kind of official recognition as enlisted. Even though one of the sites for Palmyra, I think it was partly destroyed, but it's still enlisted as a site. But are there also examples of sites that are being delisted? I mean, if you are listed, is it forever? Or are there also examples that at some point the heritage value is so diminished that it's delisted as a heritage site?
To my knowledge, I think it happened only once. I think it was in Germany. I'm not sure. I thought it was Dresden, where there was a bridge constructed, and even though the UNESCO committee repeatedly said that it would have a very negative impact on the city in terms of historic atmosphere, and it was still continued, and then it was in the end delisted. And to my knowledge, this only happened once, because it's a very severe measure. And there is this list of World Heritage in danger. And I think, unfortunately, many sites are piling up there, waiting for better or new management plans. That's a sad story. Oh, you're still unmuted. Are you still muted?
Okay. Yes, here I am. Thank you very much. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I would like to ask the participants to read the chat, because there's also a winner networking session in which you are invited to join. I would like to thank Mara and Johannes for their presentations. I hope this is also a new start, maybe from Dutch-Indonesian cooperation in the field of heritage assessment. And I think before I close, I'll give the word to Jenny. You still have something to add?
If everyone doesn't mind to open their video. So we
for the picture.
Pictures. Thank you. Let me. All right. There are 2 pages on my screen. I'll take the first one. All right. Everybody's ready.
Buncis.
Cheers. Okay. One more. for the page 1, page 2. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. All right.